And colonialism is inherently not socialist in practice. Israel is a settler colonial state. They take advantage of the labor of the global south. They take the advantage of the labor of the American people. So I understand how you want to liberate as many people as possible. I think the only thing the Israelis deserve is to get the fuck out. Another thing that makes the New York Times article so batshit insane, because this is the twisted reality that Zionists are trying to place us in. You know, and we explain this all the time, Palestinians, they have the right to armed resistance. Israel is a legal settler colonial state that is violating international law by blocking the Palestinian state. This gives the Palestinians the right to armed resistance, which countries around the world acknowledges outside of the West. This is why the world has been with Palestine. China has the World Court. Palestinians have the right to armed struggle against Israelis. So think about what the New York Times is saying. Look at what the West is trying to do. They're trying to create a class of second-class citizens in terms of international law, where everyone else, the Goyim, are victims of Zionist war crimes, and no one can hold Israel and the United States accountable for the war crimes. And you can't arm yourself to fight against these people because you'll be called a radical terrorist. And I explain to people, this is not tanky speaking, it is not in our interest to give our capitalist state the power to label people who resist them terrorists. That's a horrific idea. And here's Sana Saeed making the point I'm making as well. You have Israelis that are the most radicalized group. When have we ever seen a group victim of genocide and then immediately punished for it? Like, this is how psychotic the world is now, led by the Zionist regime. This is what the Zionist entity did to the world, where things are completely upside down. For 2 years, the overwhelming majority of Israeli Jews and every one of their institutions have supported the nonstop slaughter and starvation of Palestinians. The vast majority, in this poll show, vast majority of Israeli Jews say there is no innocence in Gaza. But you're telling me that the Palestinians have to be de-radicalized? And I'll play the video. I'm going to get you in here, Kshama. This is the former spokesperson for the state of Israel. And if you guys seen him around, you know this is one of the most batshit insane Israeli propaganda accounts. And this is what the Israelis, they are cheering for this. Jewish groups all over the country, they are cheering for this because they view Palestinians as subhuman who need to be brainwashed by Zionist propaganda, or they don't have the right to exist.
Tony Blair might run Gaza, and he's absolutely the right man for the job. This is the Prime Minister whose mantra was education, education, and education. And Gaza's #1 priority after this war, de-radicalization.
Do you guys see how insane the mindset of the Zionists is? Someone who they hired Tony Blair because when it comes to committing genocide against Arabs, he figured that he got one more left in him. He's like, I got one more in me, coach. Put me back in the game. I'm not done killing Arabs. That's my favorite fucking thing to do. I'm trying to run up the score. You guys think I killed a lot of Arabs before. So they hired him to finish the damn job. And he is saying the quiet part out loud. Tony Blair is the perfect person for the job to help colonize the Palestinians. This is not a peace plan. This is an expansion of colonial power. So let me finish the clip all the way through, and then I'll get you in here, Kshama.
Tony Blair might run Gaza, and he's absolutely the right man for the job. This is the Prime Minister whose mantra was education, education, and education. And Gaza's #1 priority after this war, de-radicalization. Gaza needs to be weaned off the extremism that meant people supported the barbaric atrocities of October 7th. That means shutting down UNRWA schools, the ones whose graduates and teachers carried out the October 7th massacre. You can't teach peace in classrooms that glorify jihad. Blair also believed in investing in public services. What did Hamas do? Spent $1 billion building 500 kilometers of tunnels under hospitals, not the hospitals themselves, because they said the UN.
By the way, I don't have to spend a lot of time debunking this nonsense because we all know this is bullshit. But whenever the people in Gaza, whenever Palestinians in Gaza invested in infrastructure that bettered their lives, like, for example, the airport they built in 2005, 2006, that was immediately bombed by the state of Israel. Palestinians in Gaza often build their own electrical grids because they don't like the idea that Israelis have control of their electricity, which destroys the myth that Israel is not occupying Gaza. You hear people say Israel didn't occupy Gaza before October 7th. That is not true because at any time Israel could turn Gaza's electricity off because they control the electricity grids of Gaza. And whenever the people of Gaza wanted to go independent and create their own electrical grid, you know what Israel did? They destroyed them. Israel was in complete control, 100% control of the sovereignty of the people in Gaza before October 7th, which is why they engaged in their jailbreak. But before I continue, we don't have to go that much into this video. Kshama, any reactions?
Just that how it's what you're saying, how naked it is, that the reason that the representatives of Western imperialism are fond of Tony Blair is because he has the quote unquote experience of being somebody who led another massacre of several years ago. And so these are all people who are members of the same cabal. And that is why I think, just for me, the headline of all of this is we need international working class movements and we need general strikes in order to push back against and defeat these powerful entities. I mean, these are all, I mean, who is Tony Blair? Who is Donald Trump? All of these are representatives of the billionaire class as a whole. And I would also say that I think it's in terms of understanding how the capitalist system works internationally, we as working people and as Marxists have to be clear that we cannot put our faith in any heads of any nation state under capitalism, and we cannot put our faith certainly in any of the billionaires. So in other words, the billionaires and the people who represent them, none of them is on our side. And we have to be clear that the billionaires who are in allegiance with the Chinese state or with the Russian state, they are not on our side either. And ultimately, we can only rely on working class fight back. And so working people in every nation, whether it's Russia or China or the US or Palestine and even Israel, actually, we need that type of working class solidarity. And at this moment, I think just to draw out a couple of points, actually, even many Israeli working people, even though they may not share our points of view on Palestinian people, and they are heavily indoctrinated, and it's really horrific, the ideas that they have. As you said, there's no innocent Palestinian. This is the indoctrination that the vast majority of Israelis grow up under. But what's interesting and what's important to note is that despite all of that, there are mass protests in Israel to end the war, because from their own self-preservation standpoint, they understand that this is going nowhere. And so, in other words, the support for Netanyahu and the support for the US ruling class to continue this genocide is actually very low. And the only way we can end this genocide is also to turn this into a fight to end all US military aid to the Israeli state, which is the starting point to end the occupation. And so for us, working class action, general strikes, shutting down the profit machine, that is imperative, because without that, we are not going to win. And in fact, what we're seeing is that even though the opinion polls, Nick, you and I talked about this the last time I was on, the opinion polls are incredible right now. The majority of the American people does not support what Israel is doing in Gaza. In fact, what's stunning is that even among Republican voters aged 18 to 34, only 24% of them support Israel at this point. So that's how striking. Even in Trump's MAGA base, there is mass anger against the genocide, and yet the genocide continues unabated. That's the political, analytical question we have to ask ourselves. How is it that in the face of such enormous anger at the genocide, it still continues? And now you have this 20-point plan, which is it's a blueprint for the perpetual continuation of the occupation of Palestinian lands. How is this happening? This is happening because both the Republicans and the Democratic Party, they are both complicit in the genocide. They're both complicit in the occupation. They both have blood on their hands. And there is no alternative being provided by the labor leadership, which is mostly tied to the Democrats or is now making overtures to Donald Trump. So in other words, we are at a situation where on the one hand, there is mass anger against the genocide and the occupation, and yet there is zero leadership. And that is why our campaign for Congress is important, and that is why also general strikes are urgent.
Yeah, very well said. You were spitting there. The only thing I disagree with, and I won't put this out there, and feel free to share your thoughts on this. I don't think we need the Israeli people at all. I don't trust them, and colonialism is inherently not socialist in practice. Israel is a settler colonial state. They take advantage of the labor of the global south. They take the advantage of the labor of the American people. So I understand your how you want to liberate as many people as possible. I think the only thing the Israelis deserve is to get the fuck out. And the Israelis who serve the IDF need to be prosecuted. I don't think we need any Israeli socialism, no Israeli revolution. No, Israel has to go. That's why I put back on you. But I think a lot of what you said was on target. That's the only thing I kind of disagree with. I'll give you anything if you want to add anything to that, Sean, before we move on.
Sure. Yeah. No. I mean, look. It's completely understandable the anger that everybody's feeling. I feel a lot of anger. Obviously, it is just beyond the pale what has happened. I mean, this is what is unfolding is a Holocaust of the 21st century in front of our eyes, and we don't want to make any excuses for anybody who has genocidal thoughts in their minds. We're not going to excuse that. It doesn't matter who they are. What I am saying though is that ultimately, in order for the Palestinian people to be liberated, we will need socialism. We agree about that, because they're not, their liberation is not going to come on the basis of capitalism. That is not going to happen, because colonialism goes hand in hand with capitalism. And furthermore, very specifically, if you look at the Israeli state, and we just talked about this, the Israeli state is maintained by the US billionaires and by other billionaires, not because they're all drunk on Zionism. It's not all ideological. It is predominantly, it is a materialist interest, a material interest for the capitalist class internationally to maintain such outposts, bulwarks, their power positions in strategic locations in the international, in the geopolitical context. And in fact, is the existence of the Israeli state also plays a major role, is now playing a major role in the US-China conflict, the global conflict. And so ultimately, in our view, that we are not going to be able to solve these problems that face humanity without having socialism, which also requires overthrowing capitalism. I'm just saying that in that process, it is our task to win over as many working class people as we can. That doesn't mean we will make excuses for those who are who want to slaughter other working class people, other innocent people. We're not going to make excuses for that. But it's in the same vein as, when I often say that actually a lot of MAGA working class people who see Trump as their hero can be won over on the basis of a class program. Does that mean they and we will agree on every single thing? Probably not, especially not to start with. But if we can build common cause on a working class basis against the billionaires, that's what we want.
Yeah, very well said. You make a lot of good points in there as well. I want to continue. This is exactly why you need a de-radicalization program for the Israelis. and when it comes to discussing strategies about Zionism, you guys don't be, me and Shama, we love bouncing theory off each other's heads. And for strategy purposes, I explained this before. For strategy purposes, I do think it's useful for us to provoke MAGA. It's funny whenever we win over people on the right, because one of the best things you can say to win people over when you say that Trump is Netanyahu's bitch. I love saying it. I think it's a great strategy to say that because it enrages Americans. Many Americans are apathetic to a lot of things, but if they hear that their government is being owned, if you mention how you don't have any sovereignty, Israel runs your country. That's one of the most devastating talking points against Israel. That's why they label anyone as anti-Semitic if you say that. But if I was going to get into the weeds of theory, I don't even really believe that analysis, because Israel is a colonial outpost of the United States. That's why many of these motherfuckers have dual citizenships. It serves as an aircraft carrier for them to control the Middle East. Something that Europeans, the UK, Germany, obviously the imperialists in America, they wanted to have a check in the Middle East for generations in the ruling class. These are things that people fantasized of, and now they finally have the Zionist regime that played a big part of that. That's why generally my theory when it comes to imperial logic is to cut the head off that snake, and Israel's a big part of that imperial snake. And you got these people that are brainwashed from day one. They are taught Jewish supremacy. They were taught that no one's lives matter other than them. And this is what the New York Times and everyone who say that Palestinians need to be de-radicalized, I need you to be confronted with this reality. Here's the Telegram post that I highlighted. You see all the laughter? There's less than like 2% sad emojis on there's a picture. Here's the description. I know it's hard to see for you guys. The description says, in Gaza, 5 babies are reported to have been killed as a result of an Israeli bomb in the Strip. And you guys see all these laughing emojis? There's over 1,000 emojis clapping for that. Can these people be reintroduced into society? That's a rhetorical question I'm asking. Because you have Israeli that cheer on death. They are a death cult. They was protesting, and this is a story that I implore everyone to memorize, because I bring this up to every single Israeli who ever had a nerd talk to me. Hey, remember that time when you guys had rallies for the right to rape? Because in a rare moment of law and order in Israel, there was an IDF soldier that was arrested for raping a Palestinian to death. A rare moment, a very rare moment of law and order in Israel. You want to know how the populace reacted? Nigga, they fucking rioted. They stormed the prison. And you want to know what the only democracy in the Middle East did? They listened to the people and allowed the IDF the right to rape people. Meanwhile, Tony Blair, Donald Trump in the West are trying to explain to you how Palestinians are the one who need to be de-radicalized. Kshama, you have anything you want to add before I move on?
Yeah, just some continuing thoughts. First of all, yeah, I totally agree with you that this idea that somehow Netanyahu is the one calling the shots, it actually, I mean, it may be an interesting talking point to provoke the people on the right in the United States. But as you correctly said, that is not actually analytically accurate, in the sense that it is not that Israel, the outpost, is driving the colonizer state, which is the United States. It is actually the power of the U.S. state, U.S. nation state, U.S. imperialism, which is obviously, it's not a mythical construct. It is backed up by the might and the wealth and the power of U.S. billionaires, and it's also backed up by, as I said, by the wealth and the power of the billionaires in the Middle East region. And so that's the real power, the power of the billionaire class combined with the power of the U.S. nation state, U.S. imperialism and Western imperialism. That's what's driving all of this. Now, you can make an argument, I'm sure. I mean, we're not flies on the wall of these private meetings of the state, but I wouldn't rule out that maybe a given representative of the billionaire class maybe thinks this is going too far, the genocide is going too far. Certainly, I think the wiser among them understand that this is a huge liability for them, given that the vast majority of working people are now angry. It is leading to general strikes. That is not what the capitalists want. They don't want general strikes, because they know that if you first have a general strike on genocide, you can then have a general strike on other issues related to domestic class issues. So provoking working people into calling for strike actions, let alone a general strike, is not something the capitalist class wants. But at the same time, they are absolutely not, and you don't have to take my word for it, we're seeing this in front of our eyes for 2 years. It's almost time for the 2-year anniversary of the genocide. At the same time, despite all the warning signs for the billionaires, all the liabilities that they face, given the anger internationally, they are not going to put a stop to the massacres of the Palestinians, because at the end of the day, for them, they are in a conundrum. On the one hand, they're facing mass anger internationally, but on the other hand, if they blink, that will also be a message of emboldenment for the working class. That is precisely why we cannot relent at this moment. At this moment, we are seeing the sweeping historic impact of the protests and the strikes. So we need to keep going. We cannot relent. We have to keep going. And in fact, we have to intensify. We have to make it even bigger. And so, it would be earth shattering. It would be absolutely earth shattering if there were even 1 day strike action in the United States, let alone a general strike. Even if we had a widespread strike action across the continent, that would be a huge step forward. And I think all of this is important to understand who's actually driving the Israeli state's ethnic cleansing project and who actually has the power to stop it. Just one other thing I wanted to add, I totally agree with you that we cannot, the thing you're showing, the screenshot of the Israelis celebrating Palestinian babies being killed. I mean, we cannot blind ourselves to this extreme reality. Like you said, if there's any de-radicalization that's needed, any indoctrination that needs to be corrected, that's obviously what's happening in Israel against the Palestinian people. I just to explain my previous point, what I was talking about is that there is a small left, including a socialist and Marxist left inside Israel. So we should be in solidarity with them because they are courageously fighting for the correct position, and that's very hard for them to do there. And furthermore, it reminds me, and also the draft burning young people, the young people who are refusing to be drafted into the Israeli military, precisely because they are angry at the genocide. They're not making an Israeli excuse. They're saying, I don't want to participate in the genocide. Now, we can't exaggerate how many are doing it. Is a very small contingent of young people who are doing it, but we should recognize that as a victory for working class consciousness. It's a victory for international working class consciousness. If despite all the indoctrination, you can have even a few young people having the courage to say, no, I'm going to go to prison for dodging the draft, but I am not going to go and kill Palestinians. So I think that's important. And just one other thing that it reminds me of, all of this genocide has reminded me of, is, during 9/11, after 9/11 happened, most of the United States was angry, and you could not tell people, we had the protests against the Iraq war, but, let's face it, at that moment, the majority wanted the attack on Iraq, the majority wanted the attacks on Afghanistan, and it was over a period of time that Americans changed their mind, and then it came to a point where a majority of the working class was then against the invasion of Iraq and occupation of Iraq and wanted it to end. So I'm just saying that even in the seemingly the worst kind of situation, working class consciousness shows its ability to evolve, and we have to give it its best shot without compromising on our principles.